Now, joining me live is Dr. David Adler.
Dr. David Adler, head of the Australian Jewish Association.
President David Adler.
About the left's total intolerance towards Israel.
As a direct consequence of the lobbying by David Adler, by outsiders, by Pauline Hanson and others, we had a major victory in the Australian Parliament, and the then Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, agreed to slash Australian funding to UNRWA by $10 million. As David Adler writes on the Australian Jewish Association Facebook page, this is reprehensible. Australia is increasing the funding of hatred and terror incitement.
And I am delighted to be joined by the Honourable Sarah Game, MLC from South Australia. And Sarah was the person who moved in the South Australia Parliament for the adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance.
I would like to thank Dr. David Adler, President of the Australian Jewish Association, for drawing my attention to this important motion. It has been a great privilege to introduce the motion to the Legislative Council.
Whatever your views on the various issues, there is nothing in Australia remotely like the Holocaust.
Pro-Israeli groups online like Australian Jewish Association are calling these posters and protests anti-Semitic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adler. Indeed, I met you actually on my third day in Australia.
Thank you so much. Well, distinguished guests, of the Australian Jewish Association, my sincere thanks.
So much. I'm so pleased to be talking to the Australian Jewish community again.
My pleasure, and very good to be with you all.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet all of you, or at least to be able to see all of you.
Thank you so much, Alan and David, for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to the Australian Jewish Association and all the people.
Parliament, as well as to many communities, and it's always a pleasure to be with Australia.
Thanks for the invitation from David, and I look forward to the discussion.
The Aboriginal community, the Indigenous community here in Australia have had a very long relationship with the Jewish community.
This is Gideon Rosner. He's the Director of Policy of the Institute of Public Affairs.
That Israel is the only country on earth that Australia has this particular approach to the capital. Every other country, there's no question, it can nominate its capital.
As I said, I am completely bamboozled by this decision, and I do not see why there was any need for this government to pander to radical Islamism and left-wing activism.
I want you to know that the Jewish people understand what it's like to be persecuted by a large totalitarian regime. The world has a moral imperative. The major lesson was supposed to be never again. And that means that when a people is persecuted for their ethno-national or religious identities, we must speak out, we must do what we can to stop it.
Start with what should be a simple statement, but is actually now controversial. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Jewish root bodies turned their attention to solving issues of gender at yet another full-day social justice.
Another set of freedoms that we lose.
As you can see sitting next to me, I have someone who needs no introduction at all. Senator Pauline Hanson.
It's been a while since I've been contacted before a meeting and advised not to take part in it, but I was before this one by some Australian left-wingers that I know.
Rabbi Shmuley's putting on the badge for the Australian Jewish Association. Good on you.
I love the AJA. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for
the second time.
I've long been impressed, terribly impressed with the work that the association does, and in terms of addressing the most serious and pressing issues facing the Jewish world and Israel.
Huge admirer of the AJ, and I'll follow your work closely.
For
anybody that might question or wonder what the Australian Jewish Association does, can I tell you that the materials that they provide me is exceptionally helpful, and as a result I'm able to prosecute these matters so much more effectively at Senate estimates.
I want to say briefly what a big fan I am of the AJA. I have a great relationship with all the Jewish community representative bodies, but I think the AJA is a really important development in Jewish community advocacy, and I welcome the distinctive voice that you provide in the public debate. David and I actually first got to know each other through an inquiry of the Joint Committee on Human Rights into Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. And David gave a brilliant and powerful presentation before the committee about how support for free speech is intrinsic to Jewish philosophy and religious teachings. And it was a distinctive perspective because most other Jewish community organisations were supporters of 18C and opposed to reform of it. And so I really welcome the voice that you provide, particularly for the centre-right community within the Jewish community. It's a really important one.
I want to congratulate your organisation on its very principled submission on behalf of the Uyghurs in Western China. You're very principled and ethical to do that. It's a terrible situation, and kol hakavod. Again, I conclude by, when I hear other organisations and individuals bagging the AJA, you should hold out to your great credit your stand on behalf of the people who are being sent to concentration camps or having their women sterilised forcibly by a state. So that's the big issue of the day, the big moral issue, the big ethical issue of the day, and it's clear where you and I stand, and we're together on this. Thank you.
Okay, so that was just a little promo, and of course the topic of this morning is really all about the cancel culture. And what you may have heard about the AJA is all this sort of stuff. We're extreme right-wing, we're racist, we're fascists, we're Islamophobic. And just before I go on, I will mention that my co-host for this morning, Michael Bird, is a late scratching. He had an accident at home last night, and he took himself off to hospital. It seems he's got a hairline fracture of something, we don't know, but they're just going to keep him for the day. So Michael sends his apologies. So this is what you may have heard about the AJA, and I want to present some information to you to actually challenge that and give you our side of the story, basically. So just a bit of personal background and history. So Michael and I have probably known each other for 20 years. Independently, we were writing letters to the newspapers because that's really all you could do about 20 years ago. We wrote to The Age, we wrote to The Australian, we wrote to the Jewish News, we still do. Michael, of course, gets published in the Jewish News quite a lot. And about 2010, with a few friends, I started the Australian Voices for Israel, which was essentially what my vision at the time was to create something that was basically like the AJA today. But, you know, working, family, didn't quite have the time, didn't quite have the resources, so that was just a little organisation in the background. In 2014, Michael and I started Nothing Left on J-Air Community Radio. So I imagine everybody knows J-Air, and we're lucky to have Robert Bonchek in the audience, who is Mr. J-Air. So we ran Nothing Left on J-Air. It was a 2-hour program, Tuesday mornings. There were replays, of course, where we did interviews and comment. And at the time, it was probably the most popular show on J-Air. Robert might agree with that. But we stopped J-Air we stopped Nothing Left in 2018 because we basically felt that we'd said all we wanted to say on that platform. You know, it was becoming a bit repetitive, so we decided to finish. And just before that, the Australian Jewish Association sprung into existence. So the AJA was formed in Sydney in 2017, and a few of us went up to Sydney. We met David Adler, who I didn't know at the time. we sat around a table and we formed the Australian Jewish Association. There's the website. You can go on and have a look at that. What we were going to do with this organisation, we weren't quite sure, but we formed it in 2017. We drafted a mission statement, and as you can see, what we're really on about is authentic Jewish and conservative Australian democratic values. So what I want to mention two things at this point. Firstly, the name. Everybody, or some of our communal organisations, criticise us for our name because they say we're trying to be representative of all the Jewish community. In other words, we're trying to usurp the roles of the existing communal organisations. And that's just not what we're about. What we say is we're a grassroots organisation. We want to represent those Australian Jews that are politically conservative, and we present ourselves as being based on genuine Torah values. That doesn't mean that we're a religious organisation. In fact, I would say 95% of the people that are involved in AJA are not particularly frum, mostly secular. By Torah values, we really just mean Judeo-Christian values. That's really what we're on about. The name, the Australian Jewish Association, as I said, is we're often accused of trying to be representative of absolutely everybody. We wanted to put the word conservative in there somewhere when we were tossing around the idea of a name, but the problem is that we didn't want it to become confused with religious conservative, Masorti Judaism, and it just didn't seem to work. If we were going to put the word conservative in, then we needed to put the word political in, and all of a sudden we were going to have a long name that was awkward. So in the end we just left it out and we became the Australian Jewish Association. But that doesn't stop people from accusing us of trying to be representative for everybody. Our values, our core political values, mainly Israel advocacy. So we do say that Jerusalem is the eternal and undivided capital of Israel, including the Temple Mount, which should be administered by Israeli authorities. That doesn't mean that we're going to stop other communities we want to stop other communities from using it. We just think that it's inherently Jewish in nature. The Israeli history, biblical, archaeological, historical, it's all based around that particular part of the Middle East, and we just say Jerusalem is unequivocally the capital of Israel. When it comes to Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, we probably do have some differences with the communal organisations. We just say that Judea and Samaria are part of the biblical Jewish homeland. In fact, most of the Jewish history in the Torah takes place in those particular areas. Again, that doesn't mean that we're going to kick out everybody else, and I'll come to that later. The two-state solution is probably another area where we might differ from our communal organisations. The two-state solution's been around for about 100 years, and we would argue that it's been an abject failure for 100 years, not because the Jewish component is inflexible, but we would say that the Arab world, the Palestinian Arabs, have shown absolutely no interest in living alongside Israel. They want to get rid of Israel. What does that mean? Well, there are alternatives. There are alternatives to the two-state solution. That's not the topic of this particular talk, but there have been other alternatives put out there, and if we've got some time later I can go through them. We also say that it's not up to us in the diaspora to tell Israelis what to do. I mean, it's really Israel and Israelis that need to decide how to best handle this problem. So for some reason, the Jewish diaspora seems very keen on telling Israel what they should be doing with this particular part of the land. And I'm thinking of the Democrats in America, J Street, those sorts of organisations. They're very keen to tell Israelis what to do. So basically what we're on about is advocating for Israel and fighting anti-Semitism. So we will take up the cause to fight anti-Semitism where we can. We launched the AJA on 10th of September 2017. This was the title of the talk. Obviously, it was a little bit provocative, but that day we wanted to make a statement. We had AJA President David Adler speaking. We had Reverend Mark Jury speaking, who used to be in Melbourne. I think he's moved out of Victoria. For those that have never heard of him, he was the vicar of a church in Glen Ira Road. So if you know where the 7-Eleven petrol station is, and across the road there's a big church, that was his church. He's quite an expert on Islam, and very friendly to Israel. So we had those two speakers were going to launch the AJA. We made a booking at Beth Wiseman and they cancelled us. We made a booking at Mizrahi and they cancelled us, and we eventually had our booking at Caulfield Shul and South Caulfield Shul, and the event proceeded. So two of the venues cancelled. What was the problem? Well, we're not quite sure. That the communal organisations didn't seem to like the title of our talk. Not one person rang up and said, "What are you on about? What are you talking about? Can we even see what you're going to talk about?" Would have been quite happy to talk to them. They just cancelled us unilaterally, and so we had to move on. And of course, the cancel culture has taken off ever since. Nevertheless, it was okay for this particular talk, or a version of this particular talk, to be given in New South Wales State Parliament House by David Adler. He gave this talk in New South Wales State Parliament without any problem whatsoever. And what we found was that we were being cancelled, which was not entirely new to us, because during our years of Nothing Left, we found that various guests and various people were approached to not come on our program. So this was the start of the whole process. Who were we being cancelled by? Well, it was a cabal of Jewish organisations and leaders, and that's about all I can say at this point. But we know what was going on because people told us. One of the other accusations we get is that we're accused of being Islamophobic. We would say no. We say that there are many decent Muslims, and there's obviously millions of decent Muslims, good people. And we have no problem with moderate Muslims. Certainly the Quran and the Hadiths have got many contradictions, and you could argue whether Islam is inherently anti-Semitic. I'm not going to go down that road, but there are certainly aspects of Islam that could certainly be considered anti-Semitic. So once we were launched, we started bringing people out. One of our first guests to Australia was Ari Fuld, Oliver Sholem. He was an American-Israeli Israel advocate who was stabbed in the back by a Palestinian terrorist at the Gush Etzion junction. That was about 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. He sadly died. After he was stabbed, he got up and shot the terrorist who was rampaging around, and Ari probably saved the life of one of the employees at that particular shopping mall. But he died. He was a terrific guy and a great loss. In 2018, we brought out Yishai Fleischer. So Yishai Fleischer is a rabbi. He's the representative of the Jewish community in Hebron. He's a broadcaster writer. He's on Facebook. He's very active. He's a very engaging personality. So we brought him out, and he did a bit of a tour of Melbourne and Sydney. We kept going with our events. In 2019, we went up to the Gold Coast Shul because they asked us up, and it's only a small Jewish community up there, but but look at the attendance. They were really interested, and so we had a talk to them. And then, of course, COVID came along in 2020, and I guess like most of the world, we were sort of wondering to see what would happen. We had our first Zoom event on the 30th of April 2020, and that became quite a regular fixture, and we've been doing it ever since. So Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. for 1 hour precisely, we have a Zoom event. We invite various guests, commentators, politicians, journalists, anybody that's got something interesting to say about Israel and the Jewish world. So we now attract an average of 120 people live. That's every week. There's more watching on Facebook. It's hard to know exactly how many people watch on Facebook. If you look at the numbers, sometimes it can be in the hundreds, but we don't quite know whether people are actually watching or they just click on and click off. It's hard to know, but we do have a lot of people watching the recording, because obviously it's recorded, and we stream. It's not live. We stream the replay of the audio through JAir on Thursday at 12 o'clock and Sundays at 4 o'clock. And in fact, our presentations are really quite radio friendly. Sometimes the presenters will put some slides up, but even if they are talking about slides, it's really quite easy to follow the audio only. So we think that we're reaching several hundred people every week. Here are some of our guests, and a lot of those faces will be familiar to you. Obviously a lot of Liberal Party people there, but you will notice that there are some Labor Party people. Michael Danby has been very, very good to us, and the late Kimberly Kitching was also a very, very popular guest along the way. We've actually somehow we've had various ambassadors on as our guests. We had Paul Griffiths, the Australian ambassador to Israel. That was in the middle of that was in 2021. We actually had the United Arab Emirates ambassador to Australia. This was in the aftermath of the Abraham Accords, and he was a terrific guy. And he came on, and we talked about the Abraham Accords, and it was just fascinating stuff. A little earlier this year, when Ukraine was invaded, and it was about that time Australia had a new ambassador from the Ukraine, Vasil Miroshnichenko, and again we hosted him on one of our Zoom events. We actually had a Shabbat dinner with him in Melbourne, because he was in Melbourne, and fantastic bloke, just very switched on, very friendly to Israel, very friendly to Jews. And of course, Yuval Rotem is the former Israeli ambassador to Australia. He was one of our guests as well. We've had some high-profile guests, so these people you will probably be familiar with. Colonel Kemp is a big fan, Caroline Glick, Melanie Phillips, I guess most people would know their writings. Rabbi Shmuley Boteach is a fan of ours, and in fact we're forming quite a strong partnership with him, and we have plans to collaborate with him further next year. Israelis, obviously, so there's Ephraim Inbar and Mordechai Kadar. They've both been guests of Limmud Oz, but years ago. I suspect they wouldn't get invited back again, because they might have views that would be politically conservative. But they've been our guests. We've had a couple of members of the Knesset, Amichai Shikli, Simcha Rothman, and Rabbi Dov Lippman when he was a member of Knesset, and of course Izzy Liebler was one of our most popular guests, and we just think that the world is missing Izzy Liebler greatly, and we're actually planning a tribute Zoom to him in a few weeks' time, so you'll see the promotional stuff for that, and we're going to talk to his wife and his son. And we're going to talk to Susan Rutland, who was his official biographer, and we'll just have a little remembrance of Izzy because he's a great loss. We have had some Muslims and Arabs on our Zoom sessions. Imam Tawhidi might be known to some of you. He's a very prominent, outspoken Muslim. He is a Shia Muslim as opposed to Sunni, which is the majority of Muslims in the country. And he's very Israel friendly and he's very Jewish friendly. And David in Sydney keeps in touch with him. I'm not sure where Imam Tawhidi is living at the moment. I heard that he had to leave Australia. Because he's so Israel friendly and friendly towards the Jews, he's obviously a target and he has to be very mindful of his security. Muhammad Darwasha is an interesting chap. We had a chat to him. He describes himself as a Muslim Palestinian citizen of the Jewish state. So, you know, he's a good guy, you know. He doesn't want to destroy Israel. He wants to live in Israel and he's quite happy for Israel to be a Jewish state. But he can see a role for people like him living happily and together with and without any conflict in a Jewish Israel. And you know, he's doing his thing. Obviously, there's a lot of opposition, but we just think that guys like that need to be supported. We do invite people from the other side of the political spectrum from time to time, but they don't want to come on our program. You know, we can't quite. We can understand it. We don't like it, I guess. Whenever we've invited anybody from the left, we go to great pains to tell them that they're going to be treated respectfully. They'll be allowed to speak. They're not going to be shouted down. We just want to hear what they have to say, and they don't want to do it. And this is the way politics has moved in recent years. In the old days, you'd have a town hall meeting, and it would be like this. People would turn up, the politicians would stand up, and they would have to present their case to the audience, and they'd get heckled, and they would have to defend their views. I'm not saying the heckling was a good part, but it was just part of the process. But we would like to just challenge some of the things that the left say and debate the issues. And in the process, everybody wins. The audience wins because they get to hear both sides of the story and they can then make their mind up. But for some reason, the Greens have been invited several times and they just refuse. So we can't do anything about that. So, cancel culture. Is this what it's all about? As I've mentioned, venues have been approached to not host us. Guests have been advised not to join us on any of our sessions. We've had Zoom bombing. I don't know whether anybody's heard of that term. If you've got a Zoom session, what they do is that they try and talk over the guest. What we then have to do is mute them, but it's distracting and it creates a nuisance. Or they may start typing aggressive and profanities in the chat, and this is all going on while we're trying to have a conversation about something. So it is distracting, but it happens. Insults get thrown. When those on the political left don't want to debate, they just throw an insult. Oh, you're a far right wing extremist. Oh, you're this. Oh, you're a neo-Nazi. So this is what we face all the time. So this is really the cancel culture in action. I'll just play this for a moment.
And thanks for inviting me. I'll make a few preliminary remarks before we get into our main subject. First, it's been a while since I've been contacted before a meeting and advised not to take part in it. But I was before this one by some Australian left-wingers that I know. One even told me, I would hate to see you lose your excellent reputation. Charming. So look, just to make that clear, I do not boycott Conservatives and I don't think anyone else should. I'm not here to comment on Australian politics, and definitely not on internal Jewish community politics. I'm for free speech and open debate, and I detest cancel culture. So that's that.
That was Alan Johnson. He comes. He runs an organisation in England called BICOM, the British Israel Communications and Research Centre. It's a bit similar to AJAC, I suppose. It's a sort of a lobby / representative group. It's a bit left-leaning, and he was a guest of ours on Nothing Left. He was visiting Australia some years ago, so we wanted to have a chat to him, and not unexpectedly, he was contacted and advised not to appear on our program. It went ahead, and it was fantastic. He was a terrific guest. I mean, politically we might not agree on everything, but that was fine. You know, he made some comments that I would probably not agree with, and but we had a very good conversation, and there was absolutely no problem. We do get got a nice compliment from the far left. I don't know whether anybody is on Facebook, but there's a Facebook page called Gullus. They hate Orthodox Judaism, they hate Israel, they hated Jewish Israel, therefore they hate the Australian Jewish Association, but they did pay us a very nice compliment and said that we're actually quite effective, so thanks very much to Gullus. More from the far left. So out of nowhere, this was just one of several articles that appeared, and what they do, that's Philip Mendes. What they do, they try to tell everybody that they know better than we do what we're all about, and they never want to talk to us, but they seem to want to tell everybody what they're all about, what we're all about. So this is the sort of thing that we find from time to time. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Jewish News, because it's not an official communal organisation, of course, but we've had not so much problems, but we've got issues with the Jewish News. The Jewish News repeatedly ignores the Australian Jewish Association. If ever anything happens, they will go to all of the communal organisations and completely ignore us. Now you might say that early on we were just a fledgling organisation that didn't really have much impact, but 5 years down the track, we're gaining a lot of traction, and we think that you know, it would be nice if occasionally they said something about us. When they do talk about us, it's always in a negative light. But I will say that, to be fair, that the Jewish News does publish letters from me and from Michael and from other AJA people, and they have published op-eds from our people. But as a general rule, I put that picture says media disgrace. Well, it was talking about something else, but I've got to say, when it comes to the Australian Jewish Association, it hasn't glorified itself terribly much. This is another example where they took the opportunity to paint us in a very negative light. This was a few years ago. That lady is a young woman by the name of Lauren Southern. She's conservative. She's a Canadian born. She was either living or working in Canada or America. She actually lives in Australia now. She married an Australian guy, and she was active on social media. She came to Sydney. We're talking about four years ago, and she took a camera crew and went to walk down one of the main streets in Lakemba. And because she was known to be provocative, it caused a bit of an issue. The police came along and said, we don't want you to walk down the street because there could be violence. And she said, well, if there could be violence, go and talk to the people who could be violent. Why are you talking to me? It was a bit of a publicity stunt. It was provocative, and that's fine. She also had her photo taken with a group called the Lad Society. they're a bunch of neo-Nazis. It was a big mistake, but she said, and remember she was only 22 at the time, she said, look, people came up to her all the time and said, can we have a photo with you? She says yes, so they took this photo with a bunch of skinheads, and of course turned out that it was the wrong group, and she's since retracted from that. So what happened was that David Adler in Sydney made a comment, and he said, interesting that if Lawrence Southern wanted to walk down the main street of Caulfield or the main street of Bondi, this would not have been a problem. The Jewish News blew it all up out of proportion, but they missed the irony, and that was all there was to it. But it was just another example of everybody. Let's get stuck into the AJA. I'll tell you a little bit about the Jewish News and the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, because that's an interesting example of also of how the Jewish News has been treating the AJA. And this, of course, is very recent. We're talking only 3 or 4 months ago. So the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, people have heard of that, I imagine? No? Yes? Yes? Okay. So it's a relatively new definition of anti-Semitism, and what it is the usual 1 or 2 sentences, very brief. You know, anti-Semitism is hatred of the Jews, blah, blah, blah. But what it does is that it's got a series of explanatory notes that complement the official definition. And what these explanatory notes say are things like unfair and biased criticism of Israel could qualify as anti-Semitism. Not always does, but could. So if you criticise Israel unfairly, if you talk about Israel in a way that you would not talk about any other country, those are grounds where you could argue constitute anti-Semitism. BDS. And BDS, that sort of thing. So the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism has been adopted by several 30-odd countries around the world, various institutions. It's been adopted by the Liberal and Labor parties in this country, and it's been adopted by the state New South Wales and Victorian governments. It only applies to government agencies, academic institutions, educational institutions like universities. It's not a tool designed to blanket free speech. People are more than welcome to criticise Israel, as long as you do it fairly and not in a context of Israel hatred and in an unbiased way. So we wanted to get this adopted into the South Australian Parliament as well. Sarah Game is a Jewish member of South Australian Parliament. She's halachically Jewish. She's not observant. She introduced the motion to the South Australian Parliament. She worked with the AJA. She worked with the Adelaide Hebrew Congregation, and she worked with the past president of the JCCSA, which is like our JCCV, the Jewish Community Council of that state. And she was, and this was a process. It took a few months to talk to the various departments, the public service, the politicians. There was one other component of this which created a problem for people. She's with One Nation. Sarah Game is a politician with One Nation. Now that doesn't mean that she's Pauline Hanson. It just means that she, like every political party, there's a range of views, people that are, that hold all sorts of views, and they're not all political parties are uniform. There's a range of opinion within One Nation, but she happens to be with One Nation, and she was the one presenting this motion to the South Australian Parliament. Now you might think that was a good idea. The fact that she's with One Nation, is that, what's that really got to do with it? But it was a problem for our communal organisations. It almost seemed as if they would have preferred that this motion not proceed because she was with One Nation. We couldn't understand it. Anyway, this was the first article in the Jewish News. It came out on the 8th of July this year. Very inflammatory language. Alarm! There's alarm because One Nation has presented this particular petition to the Parliament. And if you read the text, there was a lone wolf approach. The JCC SA is on the verge of shepherding an effective motion through the Parliament. The Jewish communities in damage control. I don't know where all this was going to. I mean, it was just ridiculous. In actual fact, David Adler in Sydney, who was doing the bulk of the work with this and working with Sarah, actually approached or tried to contact the head of the JCC SA when he was in Adelaide some months ago, and this particular lady wouldn't even meet with him. So that's the current president, Anatay Henderson-Sapir. So anyway, the motion got through eventually. There was a bit of opposition to it. Here was the Jewish News article the following week. The JCC SA welcomes the recognition. Now they welcome it. She's delighted that the council, the Parliament has adopted the IHRA definition. Still no recognition of the role AJA played in all of this. The third episode, or the third instalment, was a letter that was written by Sarah Game and David Adler. It was a letter to the editor. They corrected the record. Well, they presented their side of it. Again, no retraction on the misinformation and the disinformation on the whole story, and still no recognition of the AJA. So this is the sort of thing we have to deal with the Jewish News. This is another interesting episode. There was a prominent New South Wales Labor person. He wrote an article in a journal that goes out. It's public, and he's Israel friendly. He's known to be Israel friendly. He wrote an article critical of Labor people. That are critical of Labor people attacking Israel. Not a fan of Bob Carr and Gareth Evans, but he wrote an article about that. He then launched into this article taking a major swipe at the Australian Jewish Association. He said things like the AJA is nothing more than a Facebook page led by a zealot. So now David Adler in Sydney is a zealot, and it's unrepresentative of anybody. I'm not naming this particular person because even though the article is public, I sent him a letter. I sent an email rather, and I wrote to him and I said, look, this is what the AJA is all about. Basically what I've said here this morning. I said we don't try to be representative of everybody. We've got our particular views. We've got a lot of support. We're just one organisation representing a part of the Jewish community, and this is what we're all about. And I outlined all of these things. So he writes back to me and he says, I have done my own research and come to different conclusions to those outlined in your emails about what the AJA is and what it stands for. That's interesting. He's done his own research. He never asked us. He never spoke to us. I don't know where he did his research from. I think I know, but I'm not going to say. So here's a prominent Labor person that's just been, I imagine, has been asked to just launch into a mudslinging attack on the AJA, and he knows better than we do what we're all about. Go figure. Okay, let's talk about what the AJA has achieved This is probably our big success to date. This is a copy of the Spectator magazine. It's a few years ago, and as you can see, it shows a Jewish man lying face down in a pool of blood, being stabbed in the back by an Australian $100 bill. And of course, the point we were making was that some of the money that our Australian government gives to the Palestinian Authority goes towards this pay for slay program, and we thought that needed to be revised. In the end, the government of the day, which was the Morrison government, the government of the day did reduce funding to the Palestinian Authority by $10 million a year. Not the complete amount, and we would say it's a step in the right direction. But this was an initiative of the Australian Jewish Association. None of the others helped out on this. They would say, the other organisations, oh yes, but we're talking to the government all the time. Yeah, who knows? What we know is that we were lobbying and actively involved in getting this result. This is another one of our achievements, as I've just mentioned, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism in South Australia. Here's another one that's interesting. At one point the Qantas website quickly had a reference to the occupied Palestinian territories. It's a loaded statement. It's political. We didn't think that was appropriate, so we contacted Qantas, and within a day or so they had that changed. Okay, little thing, but I think it's important. This is one thing that we've been on about and we treat as important, and in fact none of the other Jewish communal organisations have done anything about this, and that is Stand Up for the Uyghurs in China. When you read some of the reports, they're herded into concentration camps, they're slave labour. I mean, it's just a dreadful situation. Where is everybody? Where are they? Where are our Jewish communal organisations? They're not to be found. The AJA did decide to stand up for the Uyghurs, and we had one of their representatives on as a Zoom guest one night. This was around the time just before the Winter Olympics were on in China, so that was about a year ago, and they were having a rally outside Parliament House, and we were there. David Adler spoke to the crowd. There were several hundred people protesting about the Winter Olympics in China, and obviously the key message is that never again should apply to everybody. But that's something that we're doing, and we continue to support the Uyghurs in their fight. This was an almost achievement. We thought that there should be some sort of anti-BDS legislation. So the AJA got the ball rolling. We spoke to the government and the various public servants, the draftsmen. We actually got to the stage of preparing a draft legislation. This was at the time of Prime Minister Turnbull. It went to his desk. He actually liked the idea. He said he's prepared to run with it if he can be convinced that it has widespread Jewish support from the community. So that was good. We went to the Rabbinical Council of Australia. We went to the Zionist Federation of Australia. That was under Danny Lamb at the time. They both endorsed it completely. The ECAJ and AJAC didn't endorse it. As a result, it didn't go anywhere. Now, this legislation could have been used at the time of the Sydney Festival this year, which is when they had their BDS campaign going. We could have done something with that. This is another almost achieved, well, it is an achievement, but we sought an opinion from Jeremy Rapke, who was the former Director of Public Prosecutions in Victoria. He actually gave us a legal opinion, a formal legal opinion, that the Palestinian Authority probably constitutes a terrorist organisation. That's important because this goes back to the Pay for Slay program. If the Palestinian Authority is a terrorist organisation, then we would argue that it should not be funded and not receive any government money that goes to support the terrorists and pay their salaries while they're in jail. This is something that we really need to pick up a bit further. We do form partnerships with various groups. Caulfield Shul is very good to us, past and present. Chabad is very supportive, and there's a few of the other organisations. The Zionist Organisation of America, the ZOA, they're on our wavelength. The Christian Zionists, I have to say, have been absolutely fantastic. They are just the best supporters of ours. Whenever we look for some support everywhere, that's a picture of Mike Pence when he was Vice President of the Kotel. They really stand up and be counted. So we're very grateful to them. We're in the media quite a bit. If you have Sky News, you may well see David Adler on some of the various programs. In fact, he was on with Andrew Bolt just a couple.
Are you going to allow time for questions?
Yes, I know. I'm flying through. David's on Sky News quite a bit. He actually got onto SBS, and then Michael Bird, of course, was on Sky one time. There are regular articles in the media from David, just one of several that appear regularly. I do my video editorials from time to time. They appear on Facebook. They're 5-minute editorials, and you can look those up on YouTube. Robert Gregory is our Director of Public Affairs, and he's had an op-ed. He gets an op-ed in the Daily Telegraph occasionally. This was us a year or so ago with Jonathan Pellet. He was the Israeli ambassador chargé d'affaires before they appointed a permanent ambassador, and he was very interested in what the AJA is all about. So social media is where we do really all of our stuff. On Facebook, we've got over 20,000 followers, which is way more than any of the other communal organisations. Facebook's free, and it works well for us. You know, here we are in Canberra. This was David and I. What a great country this is. You know, democracy, freedom of speech, freedom to advocate for our favourite causes, and we're very grateful to be living here. So, what's the verdict? Are we far right-wing extremists, or just a little more conservative than the communal organisations would like to think? Whether we're in the brown section or the blue section, that will probably be argued. So the answer, so really, this is what we see from our communal organisations: is the cancel culture alive in the Jewish community? Well, unfortunately, we think it is, but we just have to work with it. And with that, I'll open up for questions and discussion.
Thank you. Ralph, did you want to ask a question?
I just found your presentation really interesting because you seem to present yourself also as incredible victims of the community. And I don't think victimhood is a very healthy position for any organisation to take. Despite, I think, and I do think that you're doing, of course we stand on different sides, but I think you're doing incredible. I do want to say so it was interesting to hear some of the things that you were saying. I do question your alliance with and your support, your apologetics rather, for one nation. Because it seems to be, it means justifying the ends here.
Can I, just to respond, we don't support any political party. We're not supporters of one nation. Personally, I can't see
in that particular context.
Okay. What did happen, and where this all started was back in when we were doing Nothing Left. Pauline Hanson made some comments about Israel. I'll come to your questions now. Pauline Hanson made some comments about Israel, and Michael and I asked her to come on the program and just hear what she had to say. I mean, she was very supportive about Israel. It doesn't mean we like her, it doesn't mean we wanted to vote for her, it doesn't mean we support her, We just wanted to hear what you had to say. That just created a whole storm within, you know, Jewish officialdom, and for some reason we get lumped with that sort of attitude, and we just say, if they've got something to say about Israel, and it's Israel friendly, we're interested in hearing it. So I can't say any more than that. I think there were a couple of questions these.
Hold on, there's somebody down here.
Okay, go ahead.
Lorna.
Good day, Alan. I'm Lorna.
Oh, hello, Lorna.
I grew up in rural Queensland, and when I grew up, most of Pauline Hanson was just coming on the scene. Half the people I went to school with voted for her. I think it's very ignorant just to say, just because she's conservative, she's racist, when you haven't said anything about the history of the Green Party. The Green Party in Germany was actually founded by literal Nazis, by a guy who was the head of the SA, but we're not allowed to say that because they identify for left-wing perspective. Why can't we not demonise? Why can't people support One Nation or UAP? I've got friends who come from socialist backgrounds. I've got friends who are strong Democrat supporters. I've got friends who are involved in what would be considered the QAnon movement. What does it matter? And why can't people have different views and different opinions and listen to others?
Thanks,
Yeah,
Lorna.
good.
Yeah,
Very good. We'll take that as a comment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you?
Oh, well, a lot of questions to ask, really.
Dirty, come on.
But I guess the main thing, Alan, is you've spoken about the notion of cancel culture and exclusion and so on. I will note parenthetically that both Australian Voices for Israel and AJA have been invited for over 10 years to attend the In One Voice Festival. The only cross-communal festival there really is, have never shown up, have never responded.
Can I? Well, I think I have responded.
Not that I recall it.
Part of the problem is personnel. I mean, we're a small organisation. It just takes. There's me in Melbourne. There's David in Sydney. We've got a few helpers, but it would just be a big job for us to sort of get involved in. I mean, we'd be happy to do it, but hopefully we can get some help to do it.
And the other thing I would say is, I'm not sure what your stance on cancel culture is. If you're so opposed to it, I'm pretty sure that AJA was very strongly in favour of HADS being expelled from the JCCV.
That's not an official view. That would be the view of some of our people who say that. The Jewish Democratic Society. There's a lot of people that don't think they shouldn't be part of the JCCV.
It's okay to cancel them?
Pardon?
So you believe in cancelling?
Personally, I don't, but it's not an AJA policy. But we have people in our group that would take that view.
The gentleman at the back.
I'd like to get you to tease out for me, please, what you understand by conservative, because you mentioned conservative at the beginning, but then I didn't hear about conservative
Running out of
again.
time.
And would you contrast that with rightist? Your cubes in the second last slide were very interesting, but stayed up only for a second. You know, that's the one. Would you clarify what's conservative about AJA and what is rightist?
Well, I mean, we would probably, majority of our people would probably
Excuse me, I'm doing the next presentation, I need to use
Okay, all right. Okay, we'll have to...
I think that question was a bit too broad-based, I'm sorry. Yeah, we've run out of time. I'm sorry. Thank you.
This is being recorded, so
yeah, it's going to be on.
Henry Greener, you'll see it up on the Facebook page or